from WNPR. I'm John Dankosky, and this is The Wheelhouse.
Woo! Y'all fired up?
What I did for New York, Donald Trump will do for America.
America is an easy place to get to.
Where men are men and the women are champions.
Not when 93% of the speech is completely different than Michelle Obama's speech.
Twilight Sparkle from My Little Pony said, "This is your dream. Anything you can do in your dreams, you can do now."
John, it's me. It's Stephen.
Bobby!
That's your Republican National Convention out of context. I'm John Dankosky. This is The Wheelhouse, WNPR's weekly news roundtable. I'm glad to be back after a couple of weeks, but now Colin McEnroe is gone. So joining me to reprise his starring role as Colin McEnroe, which he premiered at Playhouse on Park in West Hartford, is the Hartford Courant's Danny Haar. Hi there, Danny.
Good morning. An awesome responsibility in the far seat here.
Also with us today is Suzanne Bates, Director of Policy at the Yankee Institute for Public Policy. Hello once again, Suzanne.
Good morning.
And Leah Wright-Rigueur is here. She's Assistant Professor of Public Policy at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and author of The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power. Hi once again, Leah.
Always pleasure to be here.
And we'll be talking about those very lonely black Republicans in just a moment. But first, let me welcome in Mark Pazniokas. He's Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror. He joins us by phone from Cleveland, where he's covering the Republican National Convention. Good morning to you, Paz.
Good morning to you.
So last night, Donald Trump officially became the Republican nominee for president. Now, here's the chairman of Connecticut's Republican Party announcing all 28 delegates for Trump.
I come from the land where we manufacture Pez, nuclear submarines, and the home of the WWE, where men are men and the women are champions. The great state of Connecticut is casting all 28 delegates for the next president of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
So, Pez, that's J.R. Romano announcing those delegates for Donald Trump. We could probably spend the entire show just pulling apart how he decided to describe our great state here. But what have you been hearing from some of the Connecticut delegates?
The Connecticut delegation is really full of people whose first choice and second choice was not Donald J. Trump. So these are a bunch of converts, who have all had epiphanies of one sort or another on the road to Cleveland. And they're looking for talking points to bring home to talk to persuadable Democrats and independents to see if Connecticut truly is in play. Obviously the state's gone Democratic in every presidential year since '92. These folks are hungry. But the interesting thing to me is the newbies, the people who are not the hardcore politicians, they're the ones who were the enthusiastic Trump people from day one. The people who have been involved in politics for years and years and years, they were of the class that was very dubious about this guy as the head of their ticket, the head of their party. And they have kind of slowly come around, either out of necessity, out of resignation, or out of a sense that Trump has tapped into something. In a piece this morning, I quote, John Fry, who's a member of the Republican National Committee. He's also a state legislator from Connecticut, who, talked about the clerk at the cigar shop or the guy who was fixing his car at Danbury Town Fair Tire. And these were the people who were enthusiastic about Donald Trump. Fry's first choice was, Governor Walker. Chris Christie, then Governor Walker. And all of the more established politicians have stories like that. Trump was their second, their third, or even their fourth choice in that field of 17.
But what's interesting that I'm hearing from Paz, Danny, and also that I'm hearing from some other reporters that I'm talking to there, is that the excitement is real amongst some of these others. Maybe the newbies, maybe the people who are just coming into politics for the very first time. It's not an act. It's not fake, and it's not conversions. It's actually people who are very enthusiastic about a new future for the Republican Party, Dan.
The excitement is real. The candidate is fake. He can say nothing truthful. We can and we will spend the next hour parsing what's being said at the convention about Donald Trump. None of it is real. It's all just an act. Say what you will about Hillary Clinton. She is who she is, and she stands for something. Donald Trump stands for nothing. This is precisely the problem with the Republicans who are, by the way, not there, including there's a little bit of a division, as Mark says, among those who are there. Not a division, but a sort of a separation. The real separation, of course, is the people who are not there, all of the business Republicans. And among those who are there, the ones who won't mention his name, which is absolutely hilarious. The whole thing is an act. It's a Hollywood act. He didn't sign his daughter's report cards. None of this happened. It's fake.
Okay, so Danny says it's fake. An awful lot of people see fake in what they're seeing, Suzanne. But, I mean, to what Paz is saying, there are a lot of people who went to Cleveland very skeptical, who are, for whatever reason, throwing their support behind Donald Trump. You're one of those people on the business side of the Republican Party who's, like, not feeling all that good this morning. Do you see some movement of conversion, some people who are going to get behind whether this act, whether or not it's fake or not?
I don't know if I would call myself a business Republican, but I definitely, I care about policy, and I think for people who care about policy, this year is not going to be a good year. The debates, the conventions are political theater. I think, I push back a little bit on what Dan said. I think you hear a lot of fake from both parties at these conventions. It feels like a reality TV show. It does, with Donald Trump and all of his children making appearances at the convention. A lot of celebrities on both sides going to make appearances at the convention. It feels a little bit like we're moving into a new phase of American politics that's centered around celebrity instead of around ideas. And I think that should be alarming, not just to Republicans, but to everyone.
Since the cameras of CTN are here, I will use air quotes and say, celebrities, Duck Dynasty, Scott Baio. I don't know if we're really talking about the A-listers
maybe
here.
Maybe not your celebrities, but they're celebrities in their own right.
Fair enough. Fair enough. They are celebrities somewhere. So what do you see in all this, Lee? And like I said, in just a little bit, we're going to be talking about this look that the Republican Party has right now that is very, very white and is very different than what we thought we were going to get after the 2012 election, when they said very clearly we need to have a bigger tent. It's something we've discussed in the program before, but it's become very stark during this convention. Aside from that issue, what else do you see? Suzanne wants to hear more about policy. Dan says it's all fake. What do you see?
So I do think that there's an element of spectacle to political conventions just in general, right? That most conventions are tightly run ever since 1972 and Richard Nixon. These things are like productions. They're shows with a lot of pomp and circumstance. And while I think that a lot of people want to see policy, they want to see ideas and things like that, I think we have to pay attention to the fact that in some ways this is not about Donald Trump. This is about a base that is very, very angry, or some segment of the base that is very, very angry. And that anger has catapulted Donald Trump into this position, and none of us called it, right? None of us saw this coming. Maybe one or two people did a very long time ago, but the fact that he is the nominee, it's almost surreal. But for the people in the base and for the people who are pretty enthusiastic about him, and right now I think it's about 76% of Republicans have accepted the fact that Donald Trump is their candidate. There is something motivating them that we have to be able to analyze.
I don't know that I've ever heard about a poll talking about acceptance like that. It sounds like the first of 12 steps. Are you feeling the anger, Paz, on the floor there?
Depends who you talk to. If they come from the political world, no, they're more measured. But the folks who are newer to politics, yes, that is what is motivating them. They talk about that. They talk about disaffection. They talk about economic uncertainty. They talk about their kids home who are living in the basement, which, by the way, your kids, when they're at home and you're raising them, they're upstairs. Why when they come home are they in the basement? I've never got it. But anyway, so you do get that. And so the party as a whole, they're now in a position of saying, how do they transform that into a coherent message that is a positive message? And that's going to be the challenge for Mr. Trump on Thursday. They're building to that. But the delegates I talked to, or not just the delegates, because the delegation that's here is far larger than the 28 delegates and 25 alternates. You get a whole bunch of guests. You've got town chairs who are here, and they are here looking for tips on how to bring this home. I was talking to the town chairwoman of Tolland, and she's an engineer, she's an IT person, And she's a very practical political person and wants to know the best way to come home and sell this party, sell this candidate. By the way, very little interest, in talking about the 58-page platform that's packed with a whole bunch of stuff that, the Democrats are trying to make hay with. The message these guys want is it's purely on the economy. It's the condition in Connecticut, the budget difficulties, and how can a guy like Donald Trump do something with the economy. As Danny said, there's not a lot of specifics from Trump on that. He promises to do many, many things. The how he's going to do it still is not fleshed out, and quite frankly, I don't expect it will be fleshed out by the time I leave here around midnight on Thursday.
Well, Lee, I wanted to ask you about the party platforms, and this is always something we in this industry talk an awful lot about because, as Suzanne said, we're all really interested in policy. I mean, what are you going to do? And then we have these conversations about what the party platforms are going to be, both on the Republican and the Democratic side. We'll have a chance to parse the Democratic platform next week. But when we look at this, it really is, in many ways, one of the most conservative party platforms ever. They don't really want to spend too much time talking about it, but they've given, as Paz said, an awful lot of fuel to Democrats to say, look at what the platform says.
Right, and this is one of the agreements that I think was made between Donald Trump and the members of the Platform Committee and the RNC chairman, right, that you will not touch the platform. We will not, this is our bread and butter. But in many ways, the platform is symbolic, right? There's this great interview out this week with Donald Trump where, he's asked about the platform, and he says, well, yeah, they can do what they want because when I'm president, I'm going to do what I want. So there's really, right, this is about, and I saw a caller on C-SPAN yesterday brought this up, right, where she said, I felt relief when I saw the conservatism of the platform and the conservatism of Mike Pence. So now I can accept Donald Trump. So again, a lot of this is performative, right, because we actually don't know what Donald Trump is going to do if he is elected president. But we do know that many of his policies and many of his positions that he has articulated are actually at odds with the conservative wing of the party.
It actually just shows the amount of dedication that people who come on the Wheelhouse have, that you were watching C-SPAN and listening to the callers who called in.
They're fascinating.
They are sometimes fascinating. And you can give us a call if you have thoughts about this, if you've been watching the Republican convention, 860-275-7266. You can go to our website, WNPR.org/The Wheelhouse. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. Leah Wright-Rigueur from Harvard is here. Suzanne Bates from the Yankee Institute. Dan Haar from the Hartford Current. We've got Mark Pazniokis on the phone with us from Cleveland. Suzanne, does the platform matter at all? I mean, what troubles you or maybe doesn't trouble you about the platform that's been put forward, especially with a candidate who says the platform doesn't really matter to me?
I think it's interesting. The platform represents definitely a wing of the party. There are definitely regional differences. A lot of the people here in Connecticut who are Republican disagree with especially some of the socially conservative parts of the platform. I think that the platform matters. It's sort of a broad principle document, but we don't have strict party discipline in the United States like they do in other countries, like in Canada and England, where if you disagree with the party, you can get kicked out. That doesn't happen here. And I lived in Wyoming for a little bit, met Democrats who every time someone in the Northeast, a Democrat in the Northeast talked about gun control, said, please stop talking. You're going to get me kicked out of office. So it's the regional differences, I think, are very interesting. And here in Connecticut, a lot of the Republicans disagree with parts of the platform.
Looking specifically, one of the very few public policy issues that came up last night was energy independence and coal, right? So they're attacking the Democrats on energy independence when there's been more fracking, more offshore drilling, more U.S.-based energy production under Obama than clearly any president. It's a bipartisan issue. It's not something the Republicans own. And to attack the Democrats on Hillary on attacking coal, well, sign me up. Who are the people? These are the, quote, regulations that are killing business. The ones that say that when 28 people die in a mine because the mine was illegally operating and didn't adhere to obvious basic safety concerns, you come in and shut down the mine. Are those the policy? Are those the regulations that are, quote, choking off business? There's a basic disconnect going on here between the rhetoric and between the policy. Most of the policies are, in fact, bipartisan.
I think that what they're getting at is that President Obama has used the regulatory agencies to close down businesses in a way that previous presidents haven't, and so especially to push his environmental agenda. And whether you agree or disagree with it, I mean, he has expanded the use of that sort of regulatory agency. I think, too, one more thing about the platform that I think is interesting is this economic populism that has emerged in both the Democratic – I mean, so the Democratic platform was called the most progressive, and now the Republican platform has been called the most conservative. So you're seeing this polarization in the platforms in an interesting way. And, but both of them have elements of this economic populism, the anti-trade, both support Glass-Steagall, which – creates this divide between the commercial and the investment banks. It's just interesting, some of this populism you're seeing emerge.
One of the things, though, that we have seen, Leah, very clearly is a real disconnect between the highest-ranking Republican in government right now, Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and Donald Trump. I mean, he's on stage. He can barely contain what seems like his distaste for the candidate, but he continually comes out in support. I mean, I thought to go to Paul Ryan right now because you mentioned trade. I mean, he's on the other side of TPP from Donald Trump. He's on the other side of several issues, but yet somehow stands up and bangs the gavel and supports in his own way the candidate. What does all this mean for the speaker? So
one of these interesting, I'll bring up another poll. Paul Ryan, I think, is in an interesting position, right? So he is supposed to be a leader, a party leader, high-ranking party leader, which means he still has to deal with other Republicans and cross-sections. And he's brought this up multiple times where he says, I'm in a position where I have to maybe not speak what I believe, but what I have to do, right? Represent my party. And this is what my party wants. Now, for a lot of us who are outside of the party, right, or who are maybe critical of the party, we say, well, that's hypocritical. But within the party, he still has an exceptionally high approval rating, right? So a poll just came out that shows that about 80%, 85% of Republicans still like Paul Ryan and think that he is doing the right thing, even as, right, he's saying on the one hand, I support Donald Trump, right, oftentimes with terror in his eyes. And on the other hand, has come out very often and said, what Donald Trump has said was wrong, right? But I still endorse the nominee. So it puts him in this kind of awkward position where they are at opposite ends, but he still feels compelled to support the nominee.
Now, there's support for the nominee, but what we've really been hearing over the course of the last couple of days is something like what we're going to hear from Ben Carson right now. He continued, as many speakers have done, to criticize Hillary Clinton, taking a slightly different approach here.
So are we willing to elect someone as president who has as their role model somebody who acknowledges Lucifer? Think about that.
Ben Carson, I think, was referring to Saul Alinsky, who Hillary Clinton wrote about in college, and Alinsky referenced in a book that he wrote. Paz, how much of everything that you're hearing in Cleveland is all about Hillary Rodham Clinton?
Much of it is the Dr. Carson moment. I have to admit, I was very tired, and I really thought I imagined what he just said, because at that moment, a protester started screaming in front of me, and there was a little scuffle. So it was this odd moment. But yes, look, every convention, it's about two things: promoting your guy, attacking the other one, and that is certainly what you're seeing over and over again. Here in language that I've never heard before at a convention. The other night you had Pat Smith, whose son Sean was one of the 4 Americans killed at the U.S. diplomatic post in Benghazi. To see a mother full of rage and grief stand on a stage of a national convention and say, I hold Hillary Clinton personally responsible for the death of my son, very, very tough stuff. There were chants last night when Chris Christie, in his role as a former federal prosecutor, was making, quote-unquote, the case against Hillary Clinton. The crowd hijacked his moment, and they're chanting, lock her up, lock her up. And Christie actually tried to quiet them to finish his speech. But you do have that deep vein of real disgust with Hillary Clinton, which is going to be, which we'll see next week in Philadelphia with the same attitude towards Donald Trump. These are two of the most polarizing major party nominees that we'll probably ever see.
But I guess I'm wondering, Danny, if not for the boogeyman that is Bill Clinton or the boogie woman that is Hillary Clinton, I mean, we haven't heard many other specifics coming out of anyone's mouth. The clear message in the first couple days is we have to defeat Hillary, or as some would say, lock her up. That does happen at every convention on both sides, but it feels as though so far the Republican National Convention has been tilted toward that message. Maybe we will hear a positive message from Donald Trump on Thursday night, but that's what we've heard so far.
Well, we're not going to hear a positive message from Donald Trump about anything other than Donald Trump. If anybody thinks otherwise, then I want what they're getting. This is an anti-intellectual convention. All conventions are to some extent populist. That's, as everyone here agrees, the basic point of a convention is to draw people in through this good feeling. This one goes a little bit beyond that, and it parallels the decline of Americans' ability to understand what's going on in their world. Chris Christie is able to get up and sound like a prosecutor that he was, and by the way, audition for the Attorney General's job. Either that or make Donald Trump feel bad for not picking him as the vice president. And he's able to list all these things, Nigeria, not just Benghazi, but all these hotspots, things that either didn't go well or didn't go the way the Republicans would have wanted them to go, which is the nature of the Secretary of State's job. The world is a tough place. And portray them all as criminal acts. Right? Why can he do that? He can do that not just because it's theater, but because the American population has no idea any of the things he's talking about because we've become a stupid nation. And the problem is that this is what you get when the nation becomes stupid. This is what's happening here. People aren't paying attention. By the way, that's not intended at your listeners here. The NPR listeners are not stupid.
Thank you for pointing that out. Hey, Paz, I know I got to let you go very quickly. Where do you see the fingerprints of Paul Manafort, the Connecticut native who's running the Trump campaign? Where do you see that during this convention?
That the trains are running on time, that they have put together a largely coherent message. Manafort has become the second face of the campaign. He spoke to the Connecticut delegates the other day. The timing was interesting because the Melania plagiarism question was out front. And Manafort made clear that he is totally in lockstep with Trump on one trait, which is you do not apologize. You go on the attack, you double down. So even though Paul Manafort is described as the adult in the room when it comes to a combative take against Hillary Clinton, and by the way, the media, he and his candidate are on the same page.
Mark Pazniokis is Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror, covering the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Thanks so much for joining us, Paz. Have fun.
My pleasure.
When we come back from our break, we'll continue our conversation with Leah Wright-Rigueur, Suzanne Bates, and Dan Haar. We'll get to some of your questions as well. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. We'll be talking about race and the Republican Party and also about plagiarism and what we heard from the GOP convention. This is the Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. Colin McEnroe is away today, but joining us is Dan Haar, columnist for the Hartford Courant. Also with us is Suzanne Bates, Director of Policy at the Yankee Institute for Public Policy, and Leah Wright-Rigueur, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. She's also author of The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power. Let's talk about that a little bit. And that's become one of the real themes of this convention.
Yes.
We have known for quite some time, it is not a big secret, that the Republican Party is a party that sometimes struggles with the way it deals with, talks about race in America. After the 2012 election, there was this post-mortem, this notion that the party had to change the way it did things. Everyone in the Republican Party and outside the Republican Party was just pointing to the demographics, that we're going to be a majority-minority nation very soon, and that the Republican Party, if it's to survive, has to figure out how to talk to Hispanic voters, how to talk to African-American voters, and how to create a bigger tent of ideas. What we've seen from this party during this convention seems to be, frankly, running in the opposite direction of that.
Right. And even if you look at the bare stats, right, there are less than 1% black delegates at the convention. That's shocking. It's the lowest in recorded history, right, since African Americans have been going to the convention. Now, as one of our commentators said earlier, there are far more black people actually there, right? Just in the same way there are far more Latino and Asian there. You've got officials, you've got clerks, you've got alternate delegates, and things like that. But it's a reflection, right? The fact that the tally is so low is a reflection of kind of the abysmal state of race relations that the party is in. On the flip side of that, you've seen that there's been incredible attention, right, at least on the surface level, being paid to putting people of color in very prominent, visible positions. So having several primetime speakers be people of color, right? So we had an Asian woman, we had several Latino people, we had several black speakers, or even in the delegate the delegate counts and nominations, the state nominations, several of the people who were announcing, right, that were people of color. So this is a deliberate attempt, I think, to tap into this idea that, hey, if we broadcast what we have, right, we can say that we have a message of diversity, but it doesn't actually match the actual facts.
Well, and I guess it gets to that question of policy, which I know, Suzanne, we would like to hear more about, right? If economic security for the middle class is a message that is resonating with a lot of people who are supporting Donald Trump, and it is also a message that clearly would resonate with an awful lot of people who might be convinced to vote Republican this year, that issue of economic security for the middle class is probably more resonant with more African Americans and Hispanics in America than it would even be for the white population. But yet, it seems to be a message the GOP cannot quite deliver to that group.
Well, I guess I sort of agree. I mean, I don't know if you got to listen to Paul Ryan's full speech, but he spoke a lot about poverty and he has a poverty agenda and has been working really hard traveling the country and going to urban areas and trying to develop and deliver a message that's a conservative message on how to lift people out of poverty and how to get the middle class moving again. So I do think that there has been some attempt to do that, and in recognition among maybe party leadership that this message has been missing. There's been some really divisive rhetoric from Donald Trump this year on minorities, but I think in terms of like Republicans having a hard time talking about race, don't we all kind of have a hard time talking about race?
Oh, that is undoubtedly.
I mean, yeah. I think it's such a really difficult issue. People are afraid to talk about it.
But I think one of the things that has come up, especially this year, Leah, is this kind of binary conversation about race, which is actually maybe the most destructive thing that we've gotten to, which is you're either on the side of Black Lives Matter or you're on the other side. And, of course, this has been stoked by this series of violent attacks that have happened both against African Americans and, in the case of just a few incidents, against police. It seems as though the rhetoric right now in America and at the GOP convention, but I guess I just can't zero it down to that being the place. It's happening all across America. It's become a binary conversation. Is you're either on the side of Black Lives Matter or you're on the side of all lives matter. And I think, unfortunately, in this time and place, if you are a supporter of the Republican Party, like you can really only be on one side and stand up there on that stage.
So it's an alienating conversation, right? So this idea, and especially, again, conventions are doing particular work, right? And even though they're getting up on stage and saying, well, we want to appeal to everyone, when you say things like we shun identity politics and Obama is a divider and he's been the worst president for race relations, or, you attack or say that you were the law and order candidate, all of these things are seen as dog whistles, right? They're perceived as dog whistle politics, right? And they send a particular message to people of color. Build a Wall sends a message to people of color that says, we don't want you. We're not going to include you. And so I think part of what we're seeing here, and I've been kind of saying this for quite some time, is that if the party was really serious about reaching out to, say, black voters, police accountability, right? Or say the things that Black Lives Matter is actually arguing for, these various kind of reform movements are arguing for, are things that could be picked up as conservative causes, right? We saw a little bit of Rand Paul trying to do it. We've seen Tim Scott recently trying to do it, and Tim Scott is actually part of this poverty campaign with Paul Ryan. But it's not, in the interest of kind of doing this kind of red meat, banging the drum type politics, all of that is being kind of disseminated and swept away, right? It's really not part of the agenda.
Danny?
Yeah, one of the reasons that, and I agree that it's difficult to talk about race, one of the reasons is because racial communities, various ethnic communities and racial communities have become way less monolithic and way more diverse and way more economically diverse and look more like the nation as a whole. And so it's harder to target, the issues involving African Americans are not all urban poverty issues. But that said, you can't have a convention where you're trying to appeal to large voting blocks and have people have a history. Rudy Giuliani comes and says that the streets are unsafe. Well, there hasn't been lower crime in 40 years, even accounting for the decline in the number of the cohort of 16 to 24-year-olds, even accounting for that, and even accounting for the benefits of community policing. Things just aren't working perfectly, but they're not in the wrong direction. And so you can't have him coming up. I don't even know if that's dog whistle politics. That's just saying it straight out. And you can't have Rudy G., who didn't attack Black Lives Matter at the convention, but who did immediately before the convention, and expect to see any results.
So, and then again, whatever work Paul Ryan or others might be doing to try to bridge some of the gap, it maybe gets put to the side when we hear from Representative Steve King, a Republican from Iowa, responding to Esquire writer Charlie Pierce on MSNBC's program with Chris Hayes. Well, let's just listen. Pierce was saying that he thought that this was the last time that old white people would be running the show at the GOP convention. Here's what the representative had to say.
This old white people business, though, does get a little tired, Charlie. I mean, I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
And white people?
Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity settled the world. That's all of Western civilization.
There's a you could just sort of let it sink in for a second. I mean, I don't know. What do you say after that, Leah?
It encapsulates everything that is wrong with the Republican Party right now. It's a soundbite. That's what's so amazing about it, because it's such an explicit soundbite that really captures this is how a political representative of one of the two major political parties in this country feels about people outside of his own race.
Well, and I think, Susan, but maybe that is part of what we're getting at. Go ahead.
Well, he does not speak for Republicans.
Well, yeah,
he does not, and
exactly.
he shouldn't. And what he said is disgusting, and it's inappropriate, and it's wrong, and it's terrible. And I think 99% of Republicans would say that. I'm angry. I feel angry on behalf of Republicans when people like Stephen King say things like that are stupid and wrong.
But one of the things that I think we brought up already on this program, and has certainly been said over and over again, is that Donald Trump clearly is trying to tap into largely a type of white middle class anger that, just let's be honest here, many people have, and that many of those people who he wants to have vote for him actually might agree with Representative King. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter in America is that there is a certain part of the population that actually believes what he just said is the truth.
Maybe a small minority.
Yeah.
I do think that a larger group, I think a very small minority would agree with what he said. I think, and
we would all hope so.
And I hope his voters hold him accountable because it's terrible. But I think that a larger majority is afraid, and it's sort of whenever you see economic insecurity like you do right now, who's the boogeyman? So for Democrats, it's been the rich, the 1%. They're the boogeyman, and then on the right, the boogeyman have been immigrants, and I think that's a shame. But I do think this kind of divisive rhetoric on both sides doesn't help, right? I mean, on either way, it doesn't help, and I hope we can sort of find a way to talk about these things in a more productive way.
Well, again, you have to look at what he reflects. This is the legitimate rape comment of 2016, and the legitimate rape comment because it was more sort of obviously outrageous. No, I shouldn't say that. This is as obviously outrageous as that. The reason that his credentials haven't been revoked and that he hasn't been rebuked by the entire Republican establishment is just exactly what Susan said, because there are people – well, I don't know if you did say that. You disagreed with that. I stand corrected. I think there is a larger majority of people who believe this way in the Republican Party, and I think they are not the Republicans who are aghast by Trump. They are the Republicans who are the sort of cultural right.
But let's just be fair about this, Dan. I don't know that it's necessarily in the Republican Party, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in America. I think that in America there is, and we don't know what the percentage is, there is a certain percentage of Americans who believe somewhat what we just heard from the representative there. And that's what I don't know, Leah, a lot of people's careers have been spent trying to figure that out. What is the percentage of people who clearly believe that my race is better than another race and we should have advantages because of that? I mean, we have to get at that at some point. That's not really about politics. It's not about a party. I think it's about just American where we are right now.
Right. So actually you're right. So Pew actually did a study on this that came out a couple of weeks ago. And the results were shocking. They're actually stunning, right? So it turns out that, they did their best to measure actual explicit racial, feelings. So they asked questions like, do you believe, are black people lazy, right? Do black people have it easier? Things like that. And they found that the vast majority of hard down the line Donald Trump supporters, right? So more than 50% actually polled yes on many of these questions. But it wasn't just Republicans that were polling like this. It was also Democrats, right? So a big number of, say, for example, Hillary Clinton supporters, so about 25 to 30%. The person, the candidate who had the least amount of racial prejudice turned out to be Bernie Sanders supporters, right, which kind of flew under the radar. But part of what I think what the work that Pew was doing is really trying to dig out and tap into what is the frustration and how do people feel about racial resentment. So what we know is that there is a strain of racial resentment, and what Donald Trump has done is actually transform or maybe kind of rearrange some of that resentment and couple it with economic anxiety, right? So that the two are often tied together and talk together at the same time. So again, if you go back to one of these Pew polls, right, one of the motivating factors for Donald Trump supporters is anti-immigration sentiment, right? That's what brings, and it's a huge spread in terms of, economic anxiety is on the bottom, right? If you explicitly ask them about that, but if you tie it to immigration, it goes through the roof.
Leah Wright Regeur's book is The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power. Also with us is Suzanne Bates, Director of Public Policy at the Yankee Institute for Public Policy. Dan Haar, columnist for the Hartford Courant. When we come back from our break, we'll get to some of your calls and questions. If you want to learn more about that Pew study, we just tweeted it out at WNPR Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. Coming up on tomorrow's Where We Live with Lucy Nalpathanchel, community leaders, activists, law enforcement will all weigh in on the recent string of deadly shootings in Baton Rouge, Minnesota, and Dallas. We'll consider what's driving these horrific acts of violence. We want to hear from you tomorrow on Where We Live with Lucy. Hope you can join us for that. Today in the Wheelhouse, our weekly news roundtable, we're tackling the Republican National Convention. Despite keeping a very low profile throughout the campaign so far, Melania Trump, the wife of the Republican nominee, took over the headlines on day one of the campaign due to allegations of plagiarism in her speech. NPR edited together her convention speech on Monday night with Michelle Obama's 2008 convention speech to show some of the similarities.
And Barack and I were raised with so many of the same values.
The values that you work hard for what you want in life.
You work hard for what you want in life.
That your word is your bond, and you do what you say and keep your promise.
That your word is your bond, that you do what you say you're going to do.
That you treat people with respect.
That you treat people with dignity and respect.
Because we want our children in this nation to know
that the only limit to the height of your achievements is the reach of your dreams and your willingness to work for them.
Okay, well, there you go. Now, Dan, one question that a lot of us have had is, do we in the media just care more about this issue because plagiarism is a really big deal for us, right? If you fully lifted a column from Colin McEnroe and reprinted it as yours, you'd be canned. I mean, that's what we think about an awful lot. In the rest of America, I don't know. You get a good idea somewhere, you say it to people, it's yours. Are we making too big a deal of this?
I don't think we're making too big a deal of this. I think we are in the vanguard of making a big deal of this. We make a living through intellectual property that we create. I was in Detroit last week talking to a community activist, and Mitch Albom, the author, bought a park out of bankruptcy in Detroit and maintains the city park in a pretty tough neighborhood in Detroit. And this activist likes the idea but can't stand Mitch Albom because 30 years ago he lifted some passages when he was a reporter for the Detroit Free Press and can't forgive him. So it's not just the reporters out there. There is an intellectual bent about intellectual property. Now, that said, I think Melania Trump, the first thing we should say is she was fine. She delivered the speech very well. She comported herself very well. I don't think she would be a problem as First Lady of the United States. I wouldn't not vote for Donald Trump because of who his wife is. She's fine. It's not her problem that the Republicans took a plagiarized speech and not only didn't apologize for it, but went on the attack against Hillary Clinton.
Well, and I think that one of the things, Suzanne, that's, of course, important about this is that so much of the convention so far has been an attack on Hillary Clinton. And here Melania Trump gives a speech which is essentially a positive message. It is a message of hope, and it is a message of work and idealism. And unfortunately, this entire message seems to be exactly the same message that the last First Lady gave.
Right. I think that kind of speaks to the fact that both of them were using a lot of cliches, right?
I mean, that's fair to say.
Yes, it's plagiarism, but I mean, it's not like these were original thoughts that were like deeply
The words
different.
were kind of almost exactly the same.
I have to say too, like, so I get an email at my inbox every morning, the New York Times headlines, and this morning the top headline was how Melania Trump's speech veered off course and caused an uproar. And then two reporters go on to say later that they had a dozen interviews on the subject of how Melania Trump put her speech together. I mean, it just feels so overblown and over the top. And this is, I think, why Republicans feel like sometimes the press is not fair, because the attention paid to these, it just feels very overblown.
Well,
and
I'll just say, I don't
and
think what they say is that we're unfair. They say that we're some of the worst people ever. But that's another thing.
Okay.
I mean, are we overblowing this, Leah?
No.
No?
And let me tell you why. So I don't think that, people who are voting for Republicans or what have you, this is not a big deal for them, right? But for it should be a big deal. And let me tell you why. So we're talking in a speech about hard work, right? This woman plagiarizes, the First Lady, somebody that, the party has spent years trashing, right? And then is unapologetic about it. And so I think part of this, right, this is a serious issue. I don't necessarily think that this is about, say, kind of Melania Trump or what have you, but instead is another reflection on this bigger kind of Donald Trump presidency or Donald Trump campaign, right? It's a mess. And yet even as a mess, right, he is gaining supporters and he's gaining support. So, yes, I do think that we should take it very seriously. And I think, one of the things, Michelle Obama was lauded for that speech, right? The phrase, my word is my bond is one that is unique. As a professor, those are things that are red flags, right? We see that in a paper if we see something that is just completely out of character. And in fact, from my understanding, this is how the journalist discovered it. This is the kind of thing, right, that it is important to actually bring up and pay attention to. That being said, I think Steve King's remarks are actually much more, maybe perhaps more important in the context of the convention.
Well, I'll just say, Danny, one of the things we found out in the last day here is that the speechwriter's draft of these remarks to the RNC did not include any of these passages. Essentially, multiple reports have now said that the speech that was handed over to Melania Trump by the speechwriter didn't have any of the stuff that was lifted, so it's someplace, somewhere along the line, this stuff was inserted into the speech.
The transgression of the speech was not the plagiarism, although it was clear plagiarism. It was, A, the fact that Melania Trump spent the entire speech not personalizing her husband, which says something, and B, that the Republican Party, faced with an obvious example of plagiarism, and CNBC, I'm looking here, it's 4.835 quintillion to 1 chance that speech, it's like, will a monkey type the complete works of Shakespeare? Let's just say what it is. It's plagiarism. They lifted passages. Why don't they just say that was a mistake? But they can't say that was a mistake because they can't say anything was a mistake because they're not about ideas. They're about lies.
Suzanne, did you have a comment?
So it's interesting. The New York Times article talks about how Melania Trump took the speech from these speechwriters, and then she and Donald Trump's ghostwriter rewrote it and had listened to Michelle Obama's speeches and other first ladies. So clearly they lifted parts of her speech and put it into the speech, probably inadvertently, rookie mistake, stupid. I just think, again, like Leah said, there are things that are happening at this convention that are a lot more important. And I think that we spend so much time on these gotcha moments, and I think this turns people off because I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter at the core of who we are. I think we could move on.
Well, let's go to Kevin in Windsor. Hi, Kevin. What's on your mind?
Hey, and just wondering, Dan was talking about how fake the whole campaign has been, and I'm just wondering, what you think about the possibility that Trump really knows what he's doing, and it's fake on purpose in order to promote himself. I mean, he's not really interested in being president. He's trying to come in second so that he can say, he did all this, but at the same time promote himself.
Well, Kevin, you raised something really interesting, and it's something that, frankly, Dan, I never thought that I'd think about around presidential politics. I mean, when we hear a story from Turkey about many reports coming out saying that maybe this coup was staged the other day, we think about, well, it's Turkey and it's a kind of despotic leader, and we think, well, that's quite possible in that part of the world. But we don't really think that in American politics someone would stage the longest con in history in order to finish second and promote his own brand name. But Kevin from Windsor is frankly probably not the only person thinking that today.
That was an early thought as soon as Donald Trump started winning some of the primaries, that he didn't really want this and that he just sort of accidentally. I give him more credit than that. I think he wants to be president. I know I've heard that theory. It is true that we have more protections against despotism here, but we have a fascistic, not to say he's a fascist, a fascistic move that is an appeal to nationalism that is scary and dangerous. Again, I think these things divide along education lines, not race, not politics.
Well, Leah, you've studied an awful lot of political campaigns. I mean, we can say, honestly, we've never seen anything like the Trump campaign before, but between the gaffes, some of the willful stuff that has been done, the 60 Minutes appearance in which Mike Pence gets his national place on stage as the VP candidate and Donald Trump doesn't let him talk, an awful lot of people could look at it and say, It looks kind of like he's trying to throw it. I mean, these are all the things that happen when you are really literally trying to make a mockery of the entire system.
Right, and actually, not to bring it back to Melania Trump, but there's a line in there that from that she had been rickrolled, right? That somebody had deliberately tried to sabotage her, that kind of thing. But actually, I do think, I agree. I think he wants to be president. I don't necessarily know that he started off wanting to be president rather than prove a point. But now that he has actually, got the nominee, and if we look at everything about Trump, it says he likes power. He likes to be in the limelight. He likes to be center stage. Now, that being said, he has said repeatedly in interviews, in private conversations and things like that, that if he were to win the presidency, he sees himself more as the chairman of the board and the vice president as running the country, right? So I actually don't think that's far-fetched to say, well, he'll jump in and say, well, I think that's a good idea, or I think that's a terrible idea, or, let's do these talks, but you know what? The rest of you guys, you run the show.
A last thought on this, Suzanne. I mean, what do you see out of this? I mean, is Donald Trump seriously trying to be president of the United States here?
I think he does want to be president as much as Hillary Clinton wants to be president. I think, when you see and you feel that, the power building behind you, it's exciting. I mean, you can feel it. I think all of us need to be looking ahead to January. Either way, whoever wins this year. I know, I'm trying to be careful. Whoever wins this year, I think in January, the country's going to be very divided, and I worry about that a lot. I think that, moving forward, we need to be united in a lot of different ways.
Well, look, Leah brought this up, and it's what we'll finish with. Some viewers of Melania Trump's speech notice a similarity to a very popular 1980s song.
He will never, ever give up. And most importantly, He will never, ever let you down.
Yes, indeed. RNC delegates and viewers may have been rickrolled by the future First Lady of the United States of America. Is it possible that the other part of the speech, the one lifted from Michelle Obama, was just that, a tongue-in-cheek homage? Was Melania Trump just Michelle-rolling us? We'll never know, but maybe we'll find out next time on The Wheelhouse. Thanks to Leah Wright-Rigueur, an assistant professor of public policy at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, to Suzanne Bates from the Yankee Institute, and from Dan Haar from the Hartford Courant. Colin McEnroe is back next week. It's The Wheelhouse.